In this problem, we need to solve this equation here. So for us to know how to proceed, we have to decide, is this a linear equation, quadratic equation, rational equation, etc. To do that, let's look at the x's. Here I have an x squared in my first term. Here I have an x. Here I have an x. And here I have a constant. So the highest power on any of the x's is an x squared. So I have a quadratic equation. So let's review the steps in solving quadratic equations by factoring. The first thing I need to do is write my equation in standard form. That means I need everything on one side in descending order and 0 on the other. Then I will factor. Then I will set each factor equal to 0, and finally I will solve each resulting equation. So let's look at the equation we are given. Do I have 0 on this side? No. So I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. And I will get 2x squared. Then negative 7x minus 4x is negative 11x equals 4x minus 4x is 0. So I only get left with 6 on the right-hand side. I still need to move the 6. So I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides. And notice on the right-hand side, I get my required 0. And on the left-hand side, I have 3 separate terms, an x squared, an x, and a constant. So I can't combine any of them. So I'm just going to write it in descending order. 2x squared minus 11x minus 6 equals 0. It's better to write it in descending order as that makes factoring easier. So I'm going to factor this problem using the AC or grouping method. So what I need to do to start with is find A and C in my equation. So A is 2 and C is negative 6. So I have A times C is 2 times negative 6, which equals negative 12. And my B term, the coefficient of the X term, is negative 11. So by this method, I need to find two numbers that multiply to AC, negative 12, and they need to add to B, which is negative 11. Well, this one's fairly easy. Since they multiply to a negative number, they need to be opposite in signs. And so I think negative 12 times 1 is definitely going to multiply to negative 12, and negative 12 plus 1 is going to equal negative 11. So my two numbers I'm interested in are negative 12 and 1. Those aren't my factors. That's what I'm going to break my middle term down into. So I'm going to write 2x squared, and instead of negative 11x, I'm going to write minus 12x plus 1x minus 6 equals 0. Because negative 12x plus 1x gives me negative 11x. Do I need to write that 1 in front of the x? No, but I'm just writing it for clarification. Now I'm going to factor by grouping. What do the first two have in common? Their common factor is a 2x. And I factor a 2x out of 2x squared, I'm going to get x. Factor a 2x out of negative 12, well, 2 goes into negative 12 negative 6 times. And now I want to look at what do the last two have in common. Notice I brought down the plus. And if you look at the last two, they don't have anything in common. But remember, when you're looking for something, a common factor, everybody has a 1 as a common factor. So I can pull a 1 out of an x minus 6. And now, is this the same as this? My binomials are the same, so I pull out my x minus 6 in front. And what does it leave as my resulting binomial? 2x plus 1. Don't forget it equals 0. Now, let's see, I need a little bit more room here. And if this was on an exam, what would you want to do? You'd want to FOIL this expression out to make sure you landed up with this equation, and that will double check if your factoring is correct. I'm not going to waste your time by doing it now. So now what we have to do is we're going to use the zero product property that says if two quantities multiplied together equals 0, at least one of them has to be 0. So we set each factor equal to 0. And now notice I have two simple little linear equations. So we're going to add 6 to both sides of the first equation. And I get x equals 6. That's one solution. The second simple linear equation, subtract 1 from both sides. So I get 2x equals negative 1. Divide both sides by 2. I get x equals negative 1/2. And there's my second solution. It was a quadratic equation, degree 2, so we expect two solutions. Here they are, my two solutions. And if this was a problem on the test, I suggest you plug each solution into the original equation you were given. So you'd plug x equals 6 into the original equation, see if you land up with a true statement. Then you'd plug x equals negative 1/2 in, and again see if you got a true statement.